All right, picking this up where we left off. We were just talking about the subframe interpolation methodology. I think you pretty much understand that. You want, typically you're going to want Bezier, you want smooth actions as you navigate through your scene. Okay, all right. This file index, basically it says that every time you make a new the application makes a new subframe, you're going to increment it by whatever numbers there. All right, the application will put numbers on your subframes, and it will start at whatever you say. Start at I don't whatever 65. All right, and then increment the file number by the increment value. Okay. Now, let me just say this, that, certainly if you're dealing with, if you, what do we have? We had 50 frames up here. We got 50 frames between this keyframe and this one. And then we have 50 frames between this keyframe and the end. So we have 100 keyframes total. So by this file index would start at, well, let's do something more reasonable. We'll start at 1 and we'll do an increment of 1. So your file, your subframe files are going to be named, they're actually going to be named whatever your application project name is. In this case, 80 MB tutorial end of session 80. And then, when it's rendering the keyframe, the subframes, it'll say 001, and then the next the next subframe will be 002, 003, 004. Now, that's actually far more important than you might think. All right, because not only does it help you organize and keep track of where these keyframes are, subframes are. Okay, but your video editor, well, at least the better ones anyway, will look at that file name to determine its position within the frame stack. So the software is going to say, look, this is 001, 002, 003, 004, and that's how it's able to reassemble this series of subframes into your track, so that you get a proper animation. You don't want subframe 30 to be in front of or before 10. All right, it's not going to work out. So, all right, so that's all that is. This is just your file index, and it's up to you. You do whatever you want with that. Now, your output format, pretty important. Let me see if I can give you a rundown of these various options here. Now, you probably already know, well, and if you don't, you're going to know pretty soon. You're going to know right now that BMP is a short nomenclature for the word bitmap. And a bitmap is a uncompressed graphic file that is lossless. Now, naturally, that means that file is going to be pretty big because there is no compression. It is a lossless bitmap file structure. There's no compression and there's no loss. That would be your, let me put it to you this way, that would be your maximum quality for the subframe that this animation maker is going to create between your subframes. All right, so a bitmap. Now, a PNG, what does that stand for? Portable Network Graphic. Portable Network Graphic, okay. Now, a PNG is a compressed graphic file, but it is lossless. It's compressed, but it doesn't lose quality. The file format, the PNG file format is going to be of a lower a lower size, a smaller size on your hard drive. And it really depends. The size has a lot to do with how many pixels are in the image. An image like this is going to have more pixels, and so the file would be much larger than if this was a very simple Mandelbulb object. But a PNG is a compressed but lossless. Now, the thing about the PNG is that it supports transparency, whereas the bitmap does not. Now, the JPEG. The JPEG is a compressed lossy. Compressed and lossy. And it's an unrecoverable loss. You can't undo the compression of a JPEG. All right, and JPEGs do not support transparency. Now, it's very interesting that they actually have an M3P here, and you know what that is from like way, way, way back in our tutorial series. My goodness, I was talking about what an M3P is. Oh my goodness, I mean, way back in, looks like right around, session 13. All right, so an M3P is actually the Mandelbulb's file format, which is the same thing as over here. All right. I don't really know what the use case is in sending your subframes out to an M3P file format. Your video editor certainly can't read that, has no idea what that means. That is not a it is not a graphic file format that video editors understand. It is a format that is very specific to the Mandelbulb3D software application. So what would be the use case for putting out your subframes as M3Ps? When I saw that years ago, when would I ever do that? And I think that the only time that I would put my subframes out as M3Ps is if I wanted to have a very specific frame that I've captured. All right, let's say I have two keyframes, and somewhere in there is a frame that I think I'm going to like, to pull it out and go make it a still. All right. Now you know that the M3P is the properties only. So if I got a whole bunch of my animation maker makes a whole bunch of M3Ps. Now I can pick through that and I can look for a frame, a subframe that the Mandelbulb animation maker made. I could load that into my Mandelbulb3D software and I can render that out as a still. That's the only time I can think that I would use an M3P as a subframe. All right. Now, let me end this session by telling you this. I personally always pick PNG. Again, it is compressed but lossless. It also supports transparency. All right. So if I have a situation where I have transparency, which I don't here, although I'm close, if I didn't have fog in this area right here, that would be a transparent area. And we did talk about having a we talked about the background picture somewhere in the past. All right. Now that background picture, if you go back to that session, where did we talk about that? Looks like right in, yeah. Okay, here we go. Right around 44, 43. Okay. And talking about that background picture, we actually saw the transparency. The background picture depends upon transparency. Now, here's the point, that if you save this out as a PNG, your PNG will support the transparency. Bitmap and JPEG do not. So you may want to retain that, that transparency capability within your subframe files. So quick recap. Bitmap is uncompressed and not lossy. PNG is compressed and not lossy. JPEG is compressed and lossy. And M3P is not a graphic, it is a file format that only the Mandelbulb software can open. I always use PNG. Even though when you open up the window it'll default to BMP, I always got to watch for that. I always render my subframes as PNG. All right, we'll pick this up in the next session. I'll see you there.